Killer robots have been with us for a long time, and the first attack happened over 40 years ago. On January 25, 1979, Robert Williams was a 25-year-old factory worker for Ford Motor Company. He was working in a building with a 5-story tall industrial robot. The robot was supposed to retrieve extremely heavy parts, some of which weighed over a ton. At some point, either the robot stopped working or wasn't pulling parts fast enough, so Robert was asked to climb up and get something from one of the shelves. As he pulled himself up to reach the items, the robot's giant arm hit him in the head, killing the man instantly. Robert Williams became the first human to be killed by a robot. His body remained on the shelf for over 30 minutes until workers noticed he was missing and began looking for him. Robert's family sued the company that made the killer robot and were awarded $10 million. Today we use satellites to predict weather, but one man preferred to use leeches. George Merriweather was a surgeon in 19th century England, but in his spare time he loved to invent things. In 1850 he created a device called the Tempest Prognosticator, consisting of 12 bottles of leeches. If the leeches sensed a drop in air pressure, they climbed into a tube, causing a bell to ring. George made several weather predictions using his leech barometer. He announced several storms before their arrival, but couldn't precisely predict their timing or arrival. George tried to convince the British Navy to use his device, but they were uninterested. The original Tempest Prognosticator was lost, but working replicas may be found today near the town of Alcompton and in San Francisco. Sleep is necessary for health and well-being, but some people have avoided it for incredible amounts of time. In 1959, Tom Rounds was a radio broadcaster in New York City. He wasn't well known until he decided to stay awake for 260 hours, or 10.8 days, setting the world record. In 1964, a college student named Randy Gardner decided he could do better. He avoided sleep for 264.4 hours, just over 11 days. Randy ended his world record attempt with a press conference, then slept for almost 2 days. The record was broken again just a month later. Then it was broken yet again in 1977 by a woman named Maureen Weston, who stayed awake for 449 hours, or almost 19 days, during a rocking chair marathon. So far, Maureen holds the record. After being awake for several days, every one of the sleep-deprived subjects experienced moodiness, problems concentrating, memory deficits, and even hallucinations. But after being allowed to sleep, all of them appeared to recover completely. But there is a price to be paid. Many of them suffered from insomnia for the remainder of their lives. In the late 1930s, college students in the United States became obsessed with swallowing live fish. On March 3, 1939, Lothrop Withington Jr. was a freshman at Harvard. His friends bet him $10 that he couldn't swallow a whole fish, but as classmates and reporters watched, he proved the naysayers wrong. Before long, goldfish swallowing became a nationwide fad. One student in Pennsylvania swallowed 25 goldfish. Then a student at MIT broke that record by consuming 42 of them. The final champion of this strange activity was crowned in April when he ingested 89 goldfish within a few minutes. In 2014, one man in the United Kingdom was fined for taking the goldfish challenge, in which he swallowed 2 live fish. Then in 2021, a college student in New Jersey was charged with cruelty to animals when he swallowed his girlfriend's goldfish. In addition to being cruel, swallowing goldfish can be dangerous. If a fish gets lodged in a person's throat, choking to death is a real possibility. Giving birth is painful and difficult for women, but one invention tried to make it easier. In 1965, George and Charlotte Blonsky were living in New York City. They were granted a patent for their invention called Apparatus for Facilitating the Birth of a Child by Centrifugal Force. When a woman was ready to have her baby, she would lie on the circular table. She was then strapped to the device for safety. After the mother was secured, the table would be rotated at high speed. The centrifugal force would then cause the baby to come flying out of the birth canal. A net was used to capture the infant and prevent injury. Thus far, no pregnant women have chosen to use this unique invention. The Blonskys were awarded an Ig Nobel Prize in 1999 for their unusual achievement, and their invention also inspired an opera in 2013. A full-scale model of the device can be found in Dublin, Ireland. Exotic pets kill people all the time, but it usually doesn't involve falling from the sky. On August 25, 2010, a small airplane was carrying passengers between various cities in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. As it attempted to land at an airport, the plane fell short of its goal. Instead of touching down on the runway, it crashed into a house. Everyone in the aircraft was killed except for one person. At first, authorities thought that maybe the plane ran out of fuel, but the single surviving passenger claimed that wasn't what happened at all. Somebody brought a duffel bag onto the airplane. As the pilots were attempting to land, a crocodile escaped from the bag and began moving through the aisle. When the passengers saw it, they all ran to the front of the plane to get away from it. This caused the aircraft to become unbalanced. Then the pilot lost control and crashed. The crocodile survived the accident, but was later killed with a machete. Mexican cartels are dangerous, but one angry mother decided to hunt them down one by one. In 2014, Mariam Rodriguez was living in San Fernando with her husband and daughter Karen. One day, 10 cartel members kidnapped Karen. They demanded a $2,000 ransom for her safe return. Mariam paid the kidnappers, but Karen was never seen again. Mariam knew her daughter was dead, and she swore to get revenge. For the next 3 years, Mariam spent every waking moment tracking down the cartel members that killed Karen. She would wear disguises and create fake identities to get close to the cartel's family members. She identified 10 of the kidnappers, but instead of killing them, she had them arrested. On Mother's Day in 2017, Mariam was shot dead outside her home. Before dying, Mariam led the police to one last cartel member. It was the person who tortured and killed Karen. Mariam's killer was never found. The White House has been home to several presidential pets. On 2 occasions, the pet of choice was an alligator. In 1824, the Revolutionary War hero Marquis de Lafayette took a tour of the United States. During his travels, he was given the gift of a pet alligator. When Lafayette visited the White House, he decided to give the alligator to John Quincy Adams. Adams wasn't sure what to do with the reptile, so he kept it in a bathtub. Adams reportedly amused himself by scaring visitors with the alligator, but after a few months it was moved to a new home. In the early 1930s, the White House would provide another home for a deadly reptile. The son of President Herbert Hoover had 2 pet alligators. They were allowed to wander through the White House, which amazed and terrified guests. Today, presidents tend to avoid exotic pets. Modern visitors to the White House can expect to be greeted by cats or dogs instead. Roller coasters can be fun for those who live through the experience. In 2010, Julianus Urbanus created a scale model of what he called the euthanasia coaster. He said that the device was intended to take lives with elegance and euphoria. Additionally, the deadly amusement ride could kill 24 people at once. For those that decided to embark on this deadly adventure, they would be taken to 1,600 feet. Then the coaster would drop suddenly, reaching speeds of over 220 miles per hour. Next, it would pass through a series of spirals, which would subject passengers to forces more than 10 times Earth's gravity. As the blood rushed from their brains, passengers would lose consciousness. As the ride lasted for over 2 minutes, by the end, everyone would be dead. Julianus claimed that his deadly invention would result in a painless death. Small-scale models of the euthanasia coaster have been shown at science galleries all over the world. So far, nobody has built a version that can carry real passengers. George Washington died in 1799, but one doctor believed that he could bring the former president back from death. William Thornton was a man of many talents. He was an architect and is well known for designing the United States Capitol. William was also an inventor and became the first superintendent of the Patent Office. In addition to these things, he was also a doctor. In December 1799, William was summoned to Mount Vernon to help save a very sick George Washington. But he arrived too late. Instead of giving up, William claimed it was possible to revive the dead president. If Washington's frozen body was thawed, then filled with lamb's blood, William thought it was possible to reverse death. Martha Washington did not agree to let William work on her husband's corpse. George Washington's remains stayed in their final resting place. Parasitic twins are rare, but in the 1600s, the condition prevented one man from being executed. Lazarus and Johannes Baptista Colloredo were born in Genoa, Italy in 1617. Lazarus looked mostly normal, except for the fact that Johannes was growing out of his chest. Johannes was a parasitic twin. He rarely moved and never spoke. He also kept his eyes closed and his mouth open. The pair traveled throughout Europe, charging spectators a fee to gaze upon them. Johannes was mostly unresponsive. but those who came to view the twins could pinch him and make him groan. During one of these exhibitions, a paying customer made Lazarus angry. He hit the man and accidentally killed him. Lazarus was sentenced to death for the crime, but he avoided being executed by pointing out that Johannes was innocent and the punishment would kill him too. Lazarus and Johannes passed away several years later in 1646. The residents of one town in France thought that a werewolf was eating their children, but in reality it was just a single hungry man. In 1527, children in the town of Dole started disappearing. The town leaders investigated and concluded that a werewolf was feeding on the young. One evening, a group walking down the road came upon a suspected werewolf, but when they looked at the culprit more closely, it became clear that the killer was just a man. His name was Gilles Garnier. Gilles had recently married but had problems finding enough food to support both his wife and himself. One night, as he was foraging in the forest, a ghost appeared and gave Gilles an ointment which would turn him into a wolf and make it easier to hunt. After using the magical substance, he started eating children. The town's residents were not impressed by the werewolf. Gilles was executed by being burnt at the stake on January 18, 1574. During his time as a werewolf, he ate at least 9 children. During World War II, the United States military tried to defend Los Angeles by attacking a balloon. After the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, people on the west coast of the United States became very worried that they might be the next target. On February 24, 1942, the Office of Naval Intelligence claimed that a Japanese attack on California was possible within the next 24 hours. At 2:25 a.m. the next day, air raid sirens began screaming throughout Los Angeles. Army personnel began firing anti-aircraft shells into the air. Each shell weighed roughly 13 pounds, and the Army shot 1,400 of them into the skies over Los Angeles. No Japanese targets were hit, but several buildings were destroyed. 3 people died in car accidents caused by the artillery fire, and the excitement triggered fatal heart attacks in 2 more victims. In 1983, the Air Force reported that the radar contact which triggered the alert was probably just a weather balloon. During the Cold War, the United States created a lot of nuclear weapons. One of them was small enough to fit on a soldier's back. The Soviet Union had a much larger military than the United States. If the Soviets decided to invade Western Europe, they might have been unstoppable. The United States tried to solve this problem by creating the Special Atomic Demolition Munition, a small nuclear weapon which was contained in a convenient carrying case. The first version was manufactured in 1963 and weighed a little over 58 pounds. In the event of a Soviet invasion, soldiers would carry their bombs as close as possible to the enemy. Then they would set a timer and run to safety before the nuclear detonation occurred. Most of those who volunteered for the task did not expect to survive the explosion. So far, this weapon has never been used. Engineers are always trying to create better machines, and the future they create with them could be terrifying. In 2021, a Tel Aviv University robotics team removed an ear from a locust. Then they attached it to a machine called the earbot. The ear was kept alive by being bathed in nutritious fluids, and it was connected to the robot by a series of wires. When the locust ear detected a sound, the earbot could record and analyze it. The team that created it thinks that in the future robots may use earbot technology to hear the world around them. The researchers also think that attaching other body parts to robots could have more immediate benefits. A robot with a dog's nose, for instance, could smell diseases that aren't detectable by other methods. Will robots help us live longer, or will they try to kill us and take our body parts? Only time will tell. Street performers usually don't enforce the law, but in one case, their talents were used to stop crime. In the 1990s, Bogotá, Colombia was one of the most dangerous and corrupt cities in the world. The U.S. State Department advised Americans to not go there at all. In 1995, Antanas Mockus was elected mayor of the city and he promised to fix crime. But because of rampant corruption, he couldn't depend on police to enforce the laws. So he devised a plan to shame the city's citizens into behaving. The mayor fired 2,000 of the most corrupt police officers and replaced them with mimes. The mimes didn't have any legal authority, but they would follow anyone who was breaking the law and mock them publicly. And for those who were upstanding citizens, the mimes would applaud them. The strange approach did have a positive effect. In some areas of the city, the judgmental mimes caused crime to drop by over 50%. What would you do if a dozen armed robbers wanted everything you owned? One man who was forced to make this decision decided that the answer was death. Jonathan R. Davis was born in Monticello, South Carolina on August 5, 1816. He served in the Mexican-American War, which lasted from 1846 to 1848. On December 19, 1854, he was walking down a trail in San Joaquin County, California. A group of 13 bandits appeared. They had members from France, Australia, the United States, Mexico, and England. They wanted Jonathan's belongings. Jonathan responded by drawing 2 pistols and shooting at the outlaws. He killed 7 before his bullets ran out. Then he grabbed a knife and killed 4 more. The 2 remaining robbers ran away. Jonathan walked away, leaving the bodies of his victims behind. He supposedly lived until at least 1887. San Francisco wasn't a dog-friendly place in the 1800s, but the city still fell in love with a pair of famous canines. In 1861, a giant Newfoundland appeared outside Martha's saloon. This one had a talent for killing rats, so he was allowed to wander the streets in search of rodents. The locals named him Bummer. One day, Bummer came across 2 dogs fighting. He chased away the attacker and found that the other dog was badly injured. Bummer helped his new friend recover by bringing him food every day. The locals named this new dog Lazarus. Bummer and Lazarus were inseparable. The dogs even helped the police on one occasion by attacking a fleeing criminal. A special law was even passed to make sure animal control didn't capture them. But fame couldn't save Lazarus. In October 1863, he accidentally ate rat poison and died. Bummer survived alone until 1865 when a drunk man kicked him to death. The dog killer was taken to jail. When prisoners learned that the man had murdered Bummer, they beat him nearly to death. Garden gnomes are simply decorations for most of us, but one group decided their freedom was important. In 2005, the traveling gnome prank became popular. Someone would steal a garden gnome, then travel with it and take photographs. Eventually, the gnome was returned to its original home. A decade earlier, France's Garden Gnome Liberation Front had a different plan for the garden decorations. Starting around 1996, they began stealing garden gnomes all over France. The leader of the Liberation Front was captured in 1997. He was sent to prison for stealing over 150 garden gnomes. In 1998, the Gnome Liberation Front staged a mass suicide. 11 stolen garden gnomes were found suspended from a bridge with nooses around their necks. The Liberation Front stopped stealing from gardens after 2006, but other individuals continued to fight for gnome freedom. Today, most garden gnomes remain in captivity. Astronauts know that working in space is dangerous, but they don't usually have to worry about drowning. Luca Parmitano was a colonel in the Italian Air Force, then became an astronaut in the European Space Agency. On July 11, 2013, he was outside the International Space Station performing a spacewalk. His suit began filling with water. Luca and Mission Control ignored it, but nearly an hour later, the water floated into the helmet and surrounded Luca's face. Since there was no gravity, he couldn't get the water away from his head. It flowed into his ears, his eyes, and his mouth. Luca couldn't communicate with Mission Control, and he could barely breathe. He made it back to the space station safely with help from a fellow astronaut. NASA still isn't sure what caused the leak, but engineers think they can stop it from happening again. Some parrots are very talkative. One special bird helped catch a killer. In 2014, Neelam Sharma lived in India. On February 20th, her husband came home and found her dead, along with the family dog. The killer stabbed them to death, then robbed the house. Neelam had a pet parrot. It survived the attack, but after the murder, he became upset and quit eating. He also kept screaming the name of Neelam's nephew, Ashu. The police decided that perhaps the parrot knew something, so they questioned Ashu. Ashu confessed to killing Neelam and her dog. He was sentenced to life in prison. The parrot passed away 6 months later. Serial killers usually meet their end in prison, but one habitual murderer accidentally killed himself. Bruce Lindell was born in St. Charles, Illinois on January 29, 1953. In 1976, he began kidnapping women and assaulting them. In some cases, he killed them too. Bruce was arrested several times, but he was always released on bail. So he continued to fulfill his murderous urges. On April 4, 1981, Bruce kidnapped an 18-year-old named Charles Huber. They went bowling, then retired to Bruce's house. Bruce then tried to kill Charles by stabbing him 28 times. Charles fought back, which caused Bruce to accidentally stab himself in the leg. The femoral artery was severed and Bruce Lindell bled to death while lying beside his final victim. Before meeting his own gruesome end, Bruce killed at least 12 people. Most people who fall from a skyscraper don't survive the experience, but one man hit the ground and lived. On December 7, 2007, Alcides Moreno and his brother had a job to do. They needed to clean the windows of the Solo Tower in Manhattan. The building had 47 floors. They took an elevator to the roof, then they climbed onto the washing platform, but the pair never cleaned any windows. The cables on the platform broke loose, causing both men to fall. Alcides somehow survived the fall, but his brother died on impact. Alcides had several broken bones as well as chest and brain injuries. Somehow doctors were able to save him. The doctors said it was a miracle he survived it all. Alcides never worked as a window washer again. When do you think the first flying car was created? The answer might surprise you. When World War II ended, the aviation industry experienced an economic boom. The Convair company wanted to enter this new market. In 1947, they created the Convair Model 118, which was the first flying car. There were plans to produce 160,000 of them. Also, each flying car would sell for $1,500, which would be worth $20,000 today. A test pilot successfully flew the Convair Model 118 on November 15, 1947. He tried again 2 days later but ran out of fuel. The rough landing destroyed the vehicle. The project only produced 2 flying cars. Convair abandoned the project in 1948. Trying to influence elections is nothing new, but one man used his reproductive system to create new voters. In 2014, police entered a condominium in Bangkok, Thailand. They found 9 women living there along with 9 children. At first, authorities thought that it was a human trafficking operation, but it turned out that the women were surrogate mothers. They were paid $10,000 apiece for their services, which included raising the children. The father of the children was Mitsutoki Shigeta. He was the son of a wealthy business tycoon from Japan. Mitsutoki supposedly wanted to have 10 to 15 babies a year to help determine the outcomes of future elections. The court gave him custody of the 9 children. He returned to Japan with them. Thailand passed a new law which prevents foreigners from purchasing surrogate children. Did you know that the White House used to be open to the public? The tradition started with Thomas Jefferson. In 1805, after his second inauguration ceremony, Jefferson let the public enter the White House. He greeted his visitors, and eventually they all went home. Andrew Jackson continued what Jefferson started, but in 1829 things spun out of control. 20,000 people tried to enter the White House. President Jackson had to stay at a hotel. Meanwhile, bathtubs full of whiskey had to be used to convince visitors to leave. In 1885, Grover Cleveland decided to end the practice of letting visitors into the White House on Inauguration Day. The White House also used to open its doors to the public on New Year's Day. This began with John Adams and ended with Franklin Roosevelt in 1932. Supposedly, he didn't want the public to see that he was in a wheelchair. Today, visits to the White House by the public have to be scheduled in advance. During World War II, Japan attacked the United States with balloons. The Fugo balloon bomb carried incendiary devices and a bomb. The Japanese Imperial Army made 9,300 of them and launched them from the island of Honshu. The bomb platforms rode air currents across the Pacific Ocean and into North America. Only about 300 of the balloons were ever seen in the United States. Several of them caused forest fires in the Pacific Northwest. The only time one of these devices killed anyone was on May 5, 1945, in Bly, Oregon. 6 people came upon a deflated balloon in the forest and it exploded, killing all of them. Thousands of balloons landed in unpopulated areas all over North America. Remains of Fugo balloon bombs have been found in the forests of British Columbia as recently as 2014. People in Brazil love soccer, and if you hurt one of their favorite players, they might kill you. On June 30th, 2013, an amateur soccer game was taking place in Brazil. The referee, Otávio da Silva, told soccer player Josenir dos Santos to get off the field. Josenir refused and threw a punch at the referee. Otávio pulled out a knife and stabbed the soccer player to death. When the fans who were watching the game learned of this, they ran onto the field and began hitting Otávio with rocks. Then the crowd decapitated him and put his head on a stake. Authorities were only able to make one arrest in Otávio's murder. Most of those who participated in the execution were never found. A bank robber in Canada was never identified. The reason why may surprise you. In 1973, a man wearing a black mask walked into a bank in Kenora, Ontario. He carried a rifle, a handgun, bags to carry the money, and a bomb. The bomb was made of 6 sticks of dynamite, and the robber made a dead man's switch which was kept between his teeth. After the bags were filled with money, the bank robber walked through the entrance of the bank and out into the street. A sniper fired a shot which killed the criminal. It also triggered the dead man's switch. The bomb destroyed the man's face so thoroughly that he has never been identified. His mangled remains were buried in an unmarked grave. When faith healers get sick, is it tragedy or justice? Jack Coe was born in Oklahoma City on March 11, 1918. His parents abandoned him to an orphanage. As a young man, Jack drank a lot, but when World War II started, he joined the Army. During the war, he claimed to see a miracle. Jack stopped drinking and became a minister. Jack became the first faith healer. He toured the country with large revival tents. He would fill them with religious followers. Then he told them to not visit doctors and to never take medicine. Finally, Jack laid hands on sick people and claimed to cure them. But the sick people weren't cured, and Jack used their donations to live an extravagant lifestyle. One day, he visited Hot Springs, Arkansas, and became very sick. Jack couldn't breathe and had to go to a hospital for help. He was diagnosed with polio and passed away from the illness December 16, 1956.